One of the questions I get is, what about marriage therapy? What do you think about that? So before I answer that, let me just kind of give you my confession. That's my background. I was trained as a marriage therapist. I did extensive training as in individual therapy, but also systems theory, and so family therapy and marriage therapy. And that's what I was doing for a while. But there was a problem along the way that I couldn't get beyond. There actually was a problem in my training. What I kept doing, if you're not familiar with therapy training, the trainee would see people in the office, write up what happened, talk about it, maybe even watch videos of it with a supervisor, and the supervisor would help them begin to actualize what they've been learning in class, in real practice, and help you see where you're getting stuck and help the clients move forward. It's all meant to help clients move forward. It's not just to train the therapist. It's kind of like residents for being a doctor, right? The whole goal is to both train the doctor and heal the patient. So that was my background. I would go to supervision, and every time there was something wrong with what I was doing. It didn't matter what I tried to do. I kept getting frustrated and was dealing with supervisors who was like, well, you just must not be doing it right because I wasn't getting the results I wanted. And then I started wondering to myself, was that really the problem? Was it me? And so I began having conversations with my colleagues, the other people who were in training, and they were feeling the same way. That began to raise some red flags. Were we all that bad? I mean, were we all such bad therapists and that's why we weren't getting results? Or was there something else going on? Then I started noticing something. Not all of them, but the vast majority of the people who were my supervisors had been divorced, some more than once. So while they supposedly knew the way to help a marriage, to have a healthy marriage, they weren't doing it. So let me just say, I'm not sure they would agree with me on this, that should be the goal. The ultimate goal would be saving a marriage. That's not what they always think. Sometimes I think that the supervisors and other therapists around were like, well, it's wherever you want things to go. So I want you to imagine for a moment, I'm running down the street and I trip and fall and I break my arm, and it's hanging at this really weird angle, and I go to the doctor, and the doctor looks at it and goes, oh, wow, you've broken your arm. That would be step one, diagnosis. I don't want the next thing for the doctor to go, so you want to just leave it like that, or shall we try to fix it? I want them to go, hey, I know what's going on. Let's get this fixed. Let's make your arm whole. I kind of think about that for marital therapy. If our goal in marriage therapy is marital therapy, shouldn't we be on the side of marriage? Shouldn't we be working to help a marriage move through? Because I want to recall for you that one of the aligning features of a marriage is that you make a commitment. Now, barring several things like abuse, I believe that we try to honor the commitment. What is a commitment? A commitment is something that you do even when you no longer feel like you did when you made that commitment. Otherwise it has no meaning to it, right? If you're like, I know I promised that, but I didn't mean it if I didn't feel like that anymore, that's nothing, right? We make a vow in marriage, till death do us part for most people, because that is the setup of marriage. And so if you go to a marital therapist, my belief is that we first do everything we can to restore and bring strength to the relationship. If that fails, sure, it might end. But don't you think that would reduce the divorce rate by a significant amount if we took that seriously? And don't you think it would actually create strength in families because we're restoring this core piece back in, and we're no longer going, okay, well, it's a disposable society. If it's not going well, we'll just toss it aside. Okay, so there are some therapists, and I had many a supervisor who were basically like, well, if they don't want to be married anymore, just let it go. And what that translated to was if one person in the midst of a session went, yeah, I don't think I want to be married anymore, they would go, oh, okay, well, how do we unplug this, right? How do we get this apart? There are good or better ways of moving a marriage apart if necessary. You don't want to do it with acrimony and anger and legal stuff. But shouldn't we start by seeing what's possible, by trying to restore the marriage? That's my first thing. The second thing is I realize that our core tenets that most therapy is taught about don't hold water, at least in helping the relationship. Are they false? No. For instance, communication theory has been one of the big pieces of marriage therapy. Teach the couple to communicate better. That's what's, if they're not communicating well right now, then we need to teach them to communicate better. If we restore their communication skills, everything will get better. Not in my experience. As I've often said, if I teach them to communicate better, all I will do is make them more effective in their fights. So when I would have somebody come in and say, hey, we've got a communication problem, I would say, you probably don't. I would sit there and talk with them for a while, and after 20 minutes or so, I'd say, you know what? I've understood every single word you said. You communicate just fine for the most part. You communicate just fine. It's not communication. It's how you're taking that communication in. Communication is simply plumbing of the system, right? Plumbing in your house brings in good stuff and sends out bad stuff. Brings in water, keeps it where it's supposed to be, sends out all the waste and gets rid of it, right? That's communication is just a pipeline between two people exchanging information. And so if you hook it up badly, you get the reverse of what you want. And the same with communication. We've got to start by not saying, oh, communication is it, but there's something else behind that. And the miscommunication or bad communication or poor communication is often a symptom of the disconnection, as I've talked about in other places. But therapy made that like the core piece. And so we taught communication skills and did nothing to improve marriages. So, could marriage therapy help you? Sure, it could. It could. Statistics, though, aren't on your side. I don't say that to scare you, but let me just tell you, in a meta-analysis, what they found was that in about 50% of the cases of people who went to marriage therapy, and remember, that is the number one thing. Many times I'll have the same discussion with people and they go, oh, so marriage therapy has some problems. Okay, well, recommend a therapist for me. I just told you. So 50% of people who go to therapy still divorce. Does that statistic sound familiar? Because it's about the same as the general population. So the general population ends up at a 50% divorce rate, as do people who go to therapy. Going to therapy didn't change anything about the percent of people who got divorced. Okay? So let's go one level deeper. Only 15 to 20%, depending on the meta-analysis, said that therapy helped them at all. At all. 10 to 15%. What is that? 1.5 to 2 people out of 10 who went? Okay, so I want you to imagine, back to the doctor's office, right? Whatever's wrong with you, the doctor looks at you and says, okay, here you've got this problem and there's a procedure we can do, right? And I think you should have it. But I will tell you that when we do this procedure, half the people die from it. And when we do the procedure, only 20% or so get better. Can I sign you up for that? I would be concerned with that. Now, does that mean that marriage therapy never works? I told you, 15 to 20%. So you may find some help. You may. But you may not. So I want to tell you why I think there are problems with it. And it basically is about the therapy approach, the therapist, and the people going. And I want to take it in that order. First one, therapy approach. I've already begun to talk a little bit about that, right? That there is an orientation issue, a theoretical issue. And one is that, marriage is just a relationship. That's a piece of it that seems to float around a lot. It's a communication issue. That's another one that floats around a lot. But there's a problem with our theory base. And because of that it kind of infects the therapy overall. That the theory base that we've had for marriage therapy isn't real solid. That's our number one problem. Number two, and this is not in order, it's just there's another one. Number two is the therapist, right? So there's the therapy problem of we don't have a good basis. We don't have a good theory basis that works. A lot of research, but not a good theory base of how to improve a relationship. We often can say, oh, that relationship is broken. How to fix it? We're not so good about that. Then there's the therapist. And here's what has happened with lots of therapists. When you are a therapist, there is a layer of licensure or certification that comes along with it that then lets you kind of decide what you're going to do, who you're going to see for the most part. There's a lot of legality to that varies from state to state, country to country, all of that. But overall, you get to say, hey, this is the kind of people I'm going to see. So if you find yourself having a lot of couples come to your office, you go, oh, I think I'll do marriage therapy without the training. Some people have gone to a weekend program, read some books, something like that. But they haven't made a shift that is necessary where they go from the individual being their client to the relationship being their client. And because of that, when they have two people come into their office for marriage therapy, they go, oh, I have two people in my office. I have two individuals. I can work with two individuals. It's like double what I normally have, but it's two individuals. They don't. They have a relationship in their office, and that is their client. And because they fail to see that, they can't make a difference in it. I know that because I've often said to a person, ask them who their client is. And they come back and they say, I got a confused look. Or the person says, whoever books the session. Or, some other, you both are mine. No, the relationship is the client. So that's a therapist problem. It's an orientation training problem. The final third piece is the client problem. What I've often seen is that one person feels like they're dragged into therapy. Maybe not entirely, but more dragged in than want to be there. I've long said that if you have two people who both want to go work on their relationship, a bad therapist won't stop them. If you have two people where they both don't want to be there, a good therapist won't save them, right? That's the problem, because in the setup of therapy, and by the way, in marriage therapy, you have to have both people there to say it's marriage therapy. Two people. And so many times one person is trying to pull the other one into therapy, hoping the therapist has some way of convincing that person to stay in the marriage that they haven't had themselves. And they're sadly mistaken. Because the therapist will often go, oh, you don't want to be here? Well, let's figure out how to get you out. Or if the therapist says, hey, let's see how we can work this on, then the person who doesn't want to be there begins to do one thing. Work to convince the people who want them to work on it, the therapist and the other person, that there's no hope, that they don't want to be there, that nothing can happen. So the process that often happens is because there aren't two people wanting to work on it there, that sabotages the therapy process. So a therapy problem, a therapist problem, and a client problem. That's why we have problems in marriage therapy. So you may be wondering, Lee, what about you? You did your training as a marriage therapist? Yes, and I worked for a long time. But what I realized was I was doing more coaching than I was doing therapy. And so I finally said, that's it. I'm not calling myself a therapist anymore. I'm saying what I am. I changed hats. Therapy hat off, coach hat on. Now I do relationship coaching. Here's a little secret. You can do a relationship coaching with the one person who wants to work on it. If two people want to work on it, that is great. If I have two people who want to work on it, I'm trying to get myself out of the way and point the way for them to go. If I've got one person, I can help coach that one person on how to make a difference in the marriage to bring it back together. That's the whole point of the Save the Marriage system and the coaching that we provide along with that, to bring that process into the life of anyone who wants to do that. If you're interested in that, please check us out at savethemarriage.com. That's savethemarriage.com. This is Lee Balcom, wishing you the best as you work to save your marriage.